Yeah, I mean, it's just Luke Ford in the Danger E personality, and he's an introvert, incel or whatever. And when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. It's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And like, yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And that have different implications of the process. What's the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates?
But I'm not going to spurge on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're going to fulfill the Canadian dream or the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, oh, I could do it. I'm going to go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm going to be successful. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. I'm going to have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm going to have my own possessions. I'm going to see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. I'm your host, Jen, COE. Happy to be back here on this Sunday, the day before Valentine's Day. Over to you, Doooovid, for the introductions.
Hey, Jennifer. Yeah, thanks. Good to be back. Another, I guess, week of study. Nothing super exciting, but I have my links open, so I'll jump straight into screen share so I could clear these links off my desk. Unfortunately, my car is still in the shop. Like, it needs a part and just can't get it. It's really quite concerning. So I've been pushing off buying a new computer till I make sure I get my cars up and working, because that could end up being a huge expense. But so let me share some of these links real quick. I hadn't seen this channel before, I don't think, but maybe it's been around a few years. It's only a year old. It's a Harvard Science Book Talk channel. So I only watched one of their episodes. Some of them even have PowerPoints. So hopefully people check that out. Some good information. I had my stream with Jaidevi Usmakan on reincarnation. She put the title in Hindi, so I think it probably would have got more views had she put she put it in English in reincarnation.
I checked out some of the other vids on the channel. They were in Hindi.
Yeah, but I mean, it's funny that her Hindi video, she puts the thing in English, so this one's in English. She puts it in Hindi, but I mean, that's fine. But I think it would have probably got more views had she put it in English. But it was a good conversation, interesting conversation. Went on for 2.5 hours. I'm in her Discord right now, so we'll see if that leads to anything more. But yeah, it was a pleasant conversation. We'll see. Maybe she'll have Jennifer on, or there'll be more conversation. So anyone interested in that, check it out. Or if anyone from Jai Devi's channel tunes in for Week in Review, great. Just say hello in the chat. Maybe we'll even invite you on to talk. So I guess the big news this week in Metro Detroit is the protest at the bridge. So here's the Detroit news and just some pictures of the truckers convoy. They shut it down, the Ambassador Bridge from Detroit to Windsor. And, ironically, people are surprised to know that Detroit is south of Windsor. So just the obviously Canada is basically north of the United States, but the little geography of the Great Lakes, that Detroit is actually south of Windsor. But yeah, these big protests in Ottawa, Jennifer's old alma mater, and went across the nation, and they shut down the bridge for a whole week. And God forbid, like my car, they can't get the part, the supply chain crisis, and big issues. So that today finally they made a bunch of arrests. It looks like they arrested 25, 30 people, but the bridge is still not reopened. So we'll see what happens with that. JF has been covering the convoy. Charles was kind of like pro convoy. I mean, it's probably, we could talk about that more, but I'll just say quickly. Sometimes societal changes are zero sum, and there's winners and losers, and something like shutting it down that exerts costs for everybody. And it's the nature of protest. Here was a thing I saw on Twitter, looked like some nice rhyming, like it could be a rap. Trucks are rumbling, narrative crumbling, media fumbling, journalists bumbling, politicians stumbling, mandates tumbling. Isn't it humbling? I thought that one was pretty nice. Have you been following the protest in Canada at all?
A tiny bit, not really.
Okay, so Thursday night, Kirk Doodle was on JF again. Interesting conversation. Actually, I guess JF had a debate with Vox Day on evolution. I think it was even a few years ago after my debate. Well, I think I performed pretty well in that debate, but JF was pretty convinced that he crushed Vox Day. I don't know. I never heard him mention that he crushed me, but maybe he feels that way also. But I don't remember.
Yeah, that's because he knows you just bring out those savage burns. He doesn't.
Well, I even made like a post stream. I quoted papers, and I'm pretty thorough, research wise. But maybe Vox Day, wasn't. I have a background in science, but so he brought on Kirk Doolittle, and it's interesting. Kirk Doolittle was talking about quanta and various things. So if Gandalf checked it out, and Kirk Doolittle's definitely been a topic of previous streams. Gandalf was a former follower. I interviewed Kirk Doolittle on the Brundlecast a few years ago. Interesting character. Some character like Jennifer has her character faults that hold her back from progress that fail, like are minor in comparison to Kirk Doolittle's character faults. But at the same time,
it's a sliding scale, isn't it?
He's a smart man. That Parmenides. I actually sold this math book to someone on eBay in Chicago who calls himself Parmenides. So I'm not sure if it's you who bought my visual guide to number theory. I had it up for $100. Someone offered me $76. Their eBay account was Parmenides, but I'm not going to dox their name, but it was in Chicago. So I'm not sure if that was you who bought that, or just a coincidence that someone Parmenides bought my.
I think it's Parmenides.
Parmenides bought my number theory book. So I watched this crash course thing on African American history. I know a decent amount of African American history. I went to public schools, and that were even majority black, and read books, and I never deeply studied it. So this 34 part crash course in Black American history, if anyone's curious, it's a pretty important issue in the U.S. Maybe other places not as much, but certainly racial relations, specifically between blacks and whites, is one of the most important issues in the U.S. Rick Beato had another video. He had a video before on his 10,000 hours, because I've mentioned in chess, the Andre Erickson of blessed memory passed away, but he was the founder of the 10,000 rule hour heuristic of expertise. And, I've mentioned that many times in like chunking theory. And so he mentioned, one point he did a summer as like a house band in, the Caribbean islands somewhere. There's 10,000 hours of just playing the guitar. And then another period, a multi-year period, he taught guitar lessons for a living, and so another 10,000 hours. And I don't know if he doesn't mention chunking theory. I'm not sure. Like Andre Erickson wrote a popular book. I doubt he heard of it, but he probably he probably is familiar with this 10,000 hour heuristic rule of expertise. So just relating to him on the guitar. So God bless him in his guitar work, but the science of expertise and the guitar. So I was watching the Japanese channel, the Neural Correlates of Consciousness, just caught up in their videos. Here was a paper they were talking about structural constraint on neural correlates of consciousness. Um, Researchers on the neural correlates of consciousness need to distinguish more statistical NCC from NCC proper. Some neural events may be co-occurrent, probabilistic, coupled, or coincidental with a type of conscious experience but lack any deeper connection to it, while in other cases the relationship between neural states and the type of experience hints at a strong metaphysical relation. What distinguishes such neural correlates of consciousness proper from mere statistical NCCs in order to address the issue of how to distinguish NCCs proper from mere statistical NCCs, we propose a position we call neurophenomenal structuralism. The position hinges on the uncontroversial idea that the phenomenon experiences relates to each other in degrees of similarity and difference. These complex structures are used to identify the individuate experiences in the methods of neuroscience, psychophysics, and phenomenology. Such individuation by structure leads to phenomenal holism, which has implications for how to investigate consciousness neuroscientifically and
Phenomenal holism?
Yes, generates a constraint by which we can distinguish NCCs proper from mere statistical NCCs, the structural similarity constraint. Neural activation must persevere the structural governing the domain of experiences it is associated with in order to count as the domain NCC proper. Any activation that fails to preserve phenomenal structure fails to be NCC proper. We illustrate how the constraint works with a study of Bro and so I'll put up this Japanese channel. I've shared it before, and they've been having, they have kind of like an ongoing class and lecture just on NCC, and then they have a series of let's discuss a paper soon after reading it, and they started another one on conscious states and journal, qualia structure journal club. So the new one called the qualia structure journal club. So I've been following this channel, good stuff. So here's also them talking. So welcome everyone in the chat. So here I just read. I'm almost finishing this book on Hilbert and the Hilbert problems. And Hilbert's a famous mathematician. Hilbert space is one of the fundamental bases for relativistic physics and modern quantum theory. And he had proposed in a lecture in I think Berlin in their Royal Society 22 or 23 problems that were fundamental to understanding the current state of mathematics in many different fields. And it was what me and Jennifer, I'm not going to keep on pushing her to publish, but let's talk about publishing and what it means to publish, and you have to understand the current state of knowledge to push it forward. So in 1900, in the Royal Society, Hilbert was from the top mathematicians, and he kind of stated like, what's the current state of mathematics? And he stated 23 problems that he suggested people should work on, and some of them still remain unsolved. Like a third of them were solved in his lifetime. Another third, about half of them were solved.
Some of these problems are so nebulous that even if the solution was presented, nobody would acknowledge it, right? So that's worth just mentioning.
Well, they have to be solved in a manner of like peer review publication.
And
And
some
so, you know,
don't admit those types of solutions. They admit, more mystical type solutions, which are controversial from that perspective. That's all I'm saying.
so I mean, for example, Gödel's incompleteness theorem was actually a solution to Hilbert's second problem, and Gödel is a relation to Hilbert both in the Royal Society of Berlin. I mentioned I just read that book on Fermat's last theorem, and the prize. There's an interesting story of the um, prize. This guy Paul Wolfsecki, who God forbid was going to commit suicide, and he was a mathematician. He fell in love with this woman and was unrequited, and so he was going to kill himself, and he wrote a suicide note, and he was going to kill himself at midnight. And as midnight was approaching, he was reading a book on solutions to Fermat's last problem, the famous Pythagorean's theorem, but with x to the n plus y to the n equals z to the n. And does it have any integer whole number solutions if n is greater than 2? And there had been solutions to like n to the fourth or different solutions that and I guess he was going over one of them, and he discovered something new, and like he was so into it that it passed midnight, and then he ended up didn't kill himself. And I guess he was a wealthy industrialist, and he created this $1 million prize. And then Andrew Wiles eventually has the accepted proof of the full Fermat's last theorem, and also Fermat's last theorem. Andrew Wiles publishes, but it takes a few years till he actually gets the prize because it has to be published and, so to say, peer reviewed, and so to say, the structure of what it means to solve something, and has to set for like problems and prizes. And I wanted to mention one last thing. My last share is the root of unity. So, what's the square root of 2, or the square root of 1? Say it's 1. Well, what's the cube root of 1? And, the chat or Jennifer, what's the cube root of 1?
Well, there's multiple answers. Is that the idea? One is a solution, but then there's also perhaps another solution in the form of I or something? Is that what you're getting at?
Yes. I mean, this is basic complex numbers that there's 3 cube roots of 1. So, if you look at it, let me just see the root of 1, and you could so -1 plus the cube root of 3i divided by 2, and -1 minus this cube root of 3i divided by 2. And you could work this out. And if I saw you had that stream with Euler, it was a great video. I mean, at least a good chat, like working session. But you could work out that there's actually 3 cube roots, and if you do -1 plus or minus the cube root of 3i divided by 2, that that will also be 1. That if you multiply out and do the FOIL, that there's 3 cube roots of I of 1. 2 of them are imaginary, and that would be the case for all qubits. So it's called the root of unity. So here, for example, would be the fifth root of 1, and for that there'll be 5 different. So 1 obviously times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 equals 1, but there will be 4 different imaginary numbers, 2 of them mirrors of each other, plus or minus, that will also solve the solution. And there's a general formula for the solution to these roots of unity. And so I was just looking at this and reading it. And yeah, I'm in the middle of that book, or actually almost done, more than 2/3 done with the history of the square root of -1. And we mentioned in previous weeks in review about the cubic and the quadric, where in the history of algebra, a large part of hundreds of years was designed on like the quadratic formula, where the negative 2ab plus or minus I don't even have it memorized anymore, but the quadratic formula for solving the equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and then you have the quadratic formula. And so in ancient times they had answers to it, but they didn't have the concept in the beginning of negative numbers. They had like completing the square, which was a geometric understanding of how to solve the quadratic a polynomial. And then there was later the algebraic, and so in the beginning they only solved it for positive numbers. And but even with the quadratic, a lot of solutions are imaginary. A lot of times the solution will be the square root of a negative. And it took hundreds of years, like really until like the 1500s, till they really understood I. Euler comes up with the notation of I. And modern engineering, physics, science, mathematics really all uses I. And there's a whole bunch of different reasons why, so to say, imaginary numbers, the square roots of negative numbers, are necessary. But you just think the solutions to polynomials many times are imaginary. And so you have a just like there's a solution for the quadratic formula, there's a solution for the cubic in the quadric, and then it was proved that there will be no algebraic solution for the quintic or higher.
Is there a name for that proof?
For the proof that there's no solution for the quintic?
Yeah, that's pretty significant. Hole in one for my theory, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll put the link.
My theory accounts for why there wouldn't be anything past 4 anywhere. Asterisk 7. I did not expect that chat with Euler to go that way. Up until the moment he was like actually already into his discourse, I thought he was going to be talking about the historical development of quantum numbers and quantum theory and how they went together. And he's like launching into this novel counting system. Did you find it interesting, or what do you think?
Which one was that?
The Euler one. I thought it was a bit hard to follow. Probably if you didn't already know about math, would be pretty.
Yeah, I didn't have enough time to watch it. So I guess there's the Abel-Ruffini theorem.
That's the disproof the quintic.
Yeah, so you'll go over hopefully, and that already goes back to the early 1800s, that the proof that there won't be a solution to the quintic. And we've shown this before, like so that like the cubic, that there's a just like it's a complicated like for like cube roots of cube roots, and but you could have a formula with your quintic or quadric that you could plug and chug your numbers in and you'd come up with all 4 solutions. But there is no solution like that to the quintic. But even the simple polynomial, the quadratic equation, most of the time has imaginary numbers. For example, pardon me, Schrodinger's wave equation has an I in it. A lot of engineering, like calculus engineering, has I in it. And so, pardon me, the hiccup there. So I'm going to try to posit, for the multiple truth hypothesis, I would have to publish probably with correct mathematical logical form and maybe try to say something really quite profound.
Do you want to take a break or get a drink or something?
I have a drink here. I think I'm okay. So
Awesome.
yeah, I'll just finish this up and just say that I think imaginary numbers are really a proof of dualism, and that when we talk about the imaginary plane, we're talking about dualism, and we're talking about the non-material realm. And so to say, there's non-material solutions to material problems. And so, when you have like the concept of completing the square, what does it mean to have like a negative number or an imaginary number? It's a non-material solution to a material problem. And so it doesn't really have material significance, but in a dualistic sense. And so I'm trying to devise a little way, and I think it actually could become more profound than I thought it would, because it have implications. And I even mentioned that with T-jump, because the reality is that imaginary numbers are fundamental to the current working of science. Almost all major engineering now requires imaginary numbers.
And can you succinctly say why that's the case? Remember
why that's the case?
Saying? Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why that is so that the eigenvalues of the rotation matrix are well defined. That is the necessitary and technical reason.
Why engineering requires imaginary numbers?
That's right.
Well, I mean,
prove it basically that even a very simple rotation matrix is only invertible if I is well defined.
Yeah, I mean, so I was trying to explain just in terms of, because engineering, science, physics in general refers to relationships to each other, and those relations are usually polynomial, because a lot of the relationships between property involves a square that, the relationship from one property to another is, inverse or a squared property. And, so the solutions to polynomials are imaginary. So it could be.
That's more just a vestigial effect. That's like an artifacting effect.
Well, I mean, also for eigenvectors aren't necessary if, the only.
Yeah, they are. They're a huge part of how we understand things in terms of matrix decomposition.
Yeah, I'm saying you only need a matrix if you have multiple dimensions. So if you only have x and y and no squared, you don't need you don't need vectors.
Well, depends what you're modeling. I mean, you pretty much need vectors for everything within this worldview.
Well, no, I'm saying that you only need vectors when you take something to a higher power. I mean, that was the purpose in group theory, Galois theory, or the history of linear algebra. Is for.
Well, technically, no. I mean,
do you need vectors for lines?
Yeah, well, vectors are vector spaces, specifically like matrices, are pretty central. Specifically, diagonalizable matrices are central.
What is a vector? But say an eigenvector. I mean, can you have an eigenvector? Do you need a matrix to be at least 2 by 2 to have an eigenvector?
Well, an eigenvector is a vector that satisfies P inverse MP equals D for some invertible matrix M and some diagonal matrix D.
So it's really to be meaningful, the matrix has to be at least 2 by 2.
Well, sure. Otherwise, it's got to be square, because otherwise you're just looking at a single number. which just reduces to
Yes,
numbers.
I'm saying you're saying the same thing I'm saying. I mean, 2 by 2
I'm
is
sorry.
2 by 2 is a polynomial, and polynomials, some of the solutions are going to be imaginary. So you weren't saying anything
Right.
different than I was saying. You're just saying
No, I
it.
was adding to it and saying that the fact that that's a fact is an artifacting of the reason they were first invented, which, as far as I understand, was to have actual solutions to, like, basically it's a condition for the invertibility of a rotation matrix.
Yeah, but I don't think you're historically accurate. I mean, because
Eh,
imaginary number, like Euler, this came, the solving of the polynomial uh, and imaginary numbers, and even the use of imaginary numbers in engineering predates vectors, matrices, and eigenvectors. So
you're
I mean,
probably right.
you're
I'm just coming at it
you're
strictly from a debate
anachronizing.
perspective. You're right. I'm strictly looking at it from a debate pro perspective. I'll concede your point.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, you're describing something probably improperly, because they're saying no. I mean, historically, imaginary numbers come to polynomials, and you even had engineering like Newton, and the solution to your gravitational movement in various things, using imaginary numbers before eigenvectors comes in the last 150 years. So I mean, you could describe it in that way, and that's fine. It's good, uh, but it doesn't change the point that I'm making, is that engineering and science necessitates um, polynomials, and the solution to polynomials necessitates imaginary numbers. And
Yeah, but it was coined by Descartes in the 17th century as a derogatory term. So, just saying.
yeah, but I mean, you're not really helping. I'm saying you're trying to make some point that's not adding anything. You're just being kind of argumentative for no reason. I mean, there's a historical uh, analysis of the origins of the ideas, and why people came up with them, and the order that they came up with them, the use that they came up with them. And so if you're anachronizing these ideas when you don't actually have the picture of which ideas came first, or what they came up to in relation, or why they came up with them.
Ideas are uncovered in not instantly, what I'm saying. So if Descartes came up with it as a derogatory term, he probably didn't study it too much and like wouldn't have been given too much insight. I'm just more thinking like, when was the bulk of the work done? And I guess I don't know. So you're right. You don't have to beat a dead horse.
Yeah, so you're not really adding anything. And I mean, you could explain
I
something
can
in a different.
say that a good justification for the imaginary number is the invertibility of a rotation matrix, which is more than most, because you could just say all math is just mental masturbation. It's pretty hard to argue against that. So that very
Yeah, but I'm
succinct
saying
argument.
you're missing the obvious, because saying obviously, they had the Pythagorean equation, they had the quadratic formula for thousands of years, and that's much more basic. And the origin of the imaginary number comes from the solution to the quadratic formula. And the eigenvector, there was 1,500 years of mathematics, and even Descartes, like and it was 200 years before eigenvectors, and in Euler. I mean, I think I'm not even sure I don't even think they were contemporaries. So I don't think Euler lived after Descartes, who formed the I notation. So Descartes in his time was skeptical of imaginary numbers, and was skeptical that it had meaning. So in the time of Descartes, they already understood that there were multiple solutions if you included some phenomenon as the square root of a negative number. And historically, they just rejected those and said those don't exist. That's a non-solution, just like like a zero, or an impossibility. So if you could solve, just like, what's the cube root of 1, and I tell you there's 3 solutions. So so Descartes would have been skeptical and said, no, there's just one solution. Those other solutions that involve the cube root of a negative number aren't real. they're not meaningful, and just discarded them. And then it was Euler who systematized a practical use for these numbers. Some people before him had thought about it, and then by the time you had Newtonian mechanics and calculus being used for physics, those solutions were deemed useful because sometimes the solutions that you could have an imaginary solution, and it was deemed a solution to a physical problem, even if we couldn't understand the physical representation of it. So I'm positing, not in the way Descartes, because Descartes was skeptical of imaginary numbers, and
Descartes was a fool.
I mean, your opinion on these things doesn't matter. I don't know why you have to bring that up. I'm saying like it matters that you're going to pass some sort of judgment on these historical personalities. Saying
I was trying to console you, but please continue.
Well, no, it's just kind of pointless. Like your opinion on the value of or
so is your opinion on my opinion. So just continue with what you were saying about Descartes.
Yes, I was saying he developed certain ideas, and he didn't think that imaginary solutions were useful or meaningful, and generally was willing to discard them. And you could look at Descartes was the famous textbook for Western dualism and like a mind-body dualism. That it's questionable whether he thought of a geometry algebra in a dualistic way as algebra representative of the spiritual realm and geometry of the material realm. But we call it the Cartesian coordinate system, and having x and y equations that represent the x and y axis and could be graphed, and then having formulas that represent geometric shapes is largely credited to Descartes. And so just mentioning in terms of imaginary numbers so I'm saying something unique that I don't think I've seen anyone say. And so I'm positing a dualistic understanding of mathematics and saying that imaginary numbers are actually imaginary in a dualistic sense, that they're true non-materially, they're true in the spiritual realm. And there's a certain material reality, but there's overlaying worlds, and there's a truth of the spiritual realm, and imaginary numbers have no material truth. And so for a dualistic system, you would see that the material realm and the spiritual realm operate together. So certain phenomenon like electricity, like light propagation, like waves, like the sine function, um, various aspects of mathematics jointly operate between the material and spiritual realm. And mathematically, that's our understanding, that would correspond to our understanding of imaginary numbers. So when we say a mathematical truth, if it's real, then it's literally real. And if it's complex, it means that it has a component in the real world and a component in the spiritual realm. And so engineering necessitates a working component of the spiritual realm, that things like electricity, magnetism, quantum reality, light propagation, even sine waves necessitate the co-workings of both the material and spiritual realms. So that was I was thinking about this week. So I'm brushing up on my mathematics and my mathematical history, and so there's a lot to this. And so you could look at
yeah, that's pretty good. The synthetic dualism of the complex plane. I like that you went there. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, you can even look like an eigenvector and think more about what does that mean. But so an eigenvector.
Well, it's more, what does it mean for a matrix to be invertible? It means that it's a square matrix, first of all, and second of all, that it's possible to give it an n, a basis of dimension n.
Yeah, I'm saying, so if I'm positing a dualistic system, you say that there's an intermingling between the you could have a mathematical representation of an intermingling between what we'll call the material and spiritual realm, and even dimensionality in and of itself relies on dualism. And to say to have the 4-dimensional system, or even possibly a 3-dimensional system, necessitates the spiritual realm to maintain it, and that would be seen by what we call the I function, or certain things like the square root of negative numbers that have no physical meaning.
I
So
don't think
that
I'm still not following. Why does it become mystical with I? Isn't zero and infinity also just as mystical?
No, because I mean zero
Zero is doubling the number of numbers you have access to.
just
The
implies
complex plane is doubling the size, or in a sense, I mean, it's isomorphic to R2.
complex implies that something exists even though its existence is impossible in the material realm. So I'm just saying that I'm calling the spiritual realm, but I'm saying that there's an imaginary realm that in fact does exist, separate from the material realm. So zero is just the lack of existence and doesn't necessitate a separate realm because it's impossible to exist in the material realm. And infinity doesn't necessitate a separate realm. Infinity, just could be a maximization of the material realm, or even how you understand infinity. If there's infinite space, if that's a greater infinity than an infinite space, but infinity doesn't necessitate a separate realm. You could have negative numbers, um,
I
irrational
think it
numbers,
does, because you can point to
zero.
infinity. Everywhere you claim there's infinity, you can point to infinitude. So I challenge that infinity is conceivable, and zero, in fact. I'm not
Well, I'm
disagreeing
saying
with the general
you don't need
idea.
a second realm, saying that one realm you could define infinity within just the material realm, as opposed to imaginary numbers. You could define negative numbers.
You think you can, but it's actually easier to define I than infinity in the material realm. How the hell do you establish infinity in the material realm exactly?
Well, infinity. It's just a never-ending.
Okay, Buzz Lightyear. But I mean, the never-ending sequence, that's essentially meaningless. It's just saying I can put a bunch of numbers together. It doesn't say how many you can actually chunk or meaningfully ascertain value
I
within.
mean, it's simple. I mean, it's Euclidean geometry already has that phenomenon. You just say if there's infinite space and you just have a line going forever in one direction.
I don't actually think Euclidean geometry says that. I think it says you can extend parallel lines, which has already been established that don't exist physically.
But I'm saying that if you just posit infinite space and then you have a line that goes infinite in one direction,
right. So that's not physical. That's imaginary right there. Infinity. My point is that infinity is more mystical thinking than I. I is just, oh, we need it technically to invert
yeah. I mean,
rotation matrix.
You're mixing up terms and saying I'm using the word spiritual realm, but
I'm not mixing up words. I'm pushing back on your opinion, and I'd like
you're
to hear
using
what
the
you
word
think.
mystic. It's saying that in material,
You just used I as evidence for some spiritual realm, did you not?
Yeah, and I'm using the word you want to call imaginary or complex, but saying a non-physical realm.
And I'm
And so
saying the fact we've conceptualized
infinity doesn't necessitate a non-physical realm. You could have infinities within a physical realm.
Yeah, it kind of does. You cannot establish infinity in a physical realm. I
Of
just
course you
said do
can.
it, and you're like, imagine infinite space. I'm like, that doesn't exist. You can't establish it. It's more mysterious than I. I has nothing to do with infinity. I is a symmetry condition. Infinity is something you think you can maybe imagine, but you can't.
Infinity, I'm just saying this like a light beam going off in a direction forever.
You can't establish that you can perceive that or have any
You don't have to
concept of what
perceive
it
it.
means.
I'm not talking about perception. I'm saying that material realm, you could have infinity and zero established within just one realm.
I don't agree.
If you define these axioms or whatever, and if you need an axiom of infinite space, but you could have an infinity in just a material realm. Just means
Well,
that
I'll just
something.
put a condition that all rotation matrices are invertible, definitionally, and there you go. That will print something equivalent to I.
But I mean, I will never have a material meaning.
Yeah, it can, because a rotation matrix being invertible has a material meaning. Like, these mathematical identities represent physical things.
No, I'm saying that when you
Yes,
talk about a
they're
graphical
invented because they represent physical things, and then all the thermodynamic knowledge is basically what we currently credit science.
Yeah, but saying
Science with.
you're talking about an arbitrary axis system to represent imaginary numbers, but that isn't actually what the imaginary numbers is. Just a representational axis, but it doesn't actually represent the phenomenon. And so if you create an axis system for complex numbers, and that's a mapping related to how we understand the real elements, but that's not accurate. It's not actual what the imaginary system is. It's just a real mapping analogy to work with these numbers in the same way that we work with real numbers. But it's not representative of what's actually happening. It's just a mathematical tool that we use.
Then how come it was ridiculed by Descartes and later accepted?
You're anachronizing again.
I'm reading from
these things
here.
didn't exist when Descartes was around.
Well, it's
That
unclear
wasn't what Descartes ridiculed. I mean, Descartes just rejected that those have meaning. And then if you're saying he didn't reject these things that were discovered after him, these representations that came from Euler, after Descartes had died. So like he didn't reject these things that didn't exist in his time. He rejected that the imaginary solutions to polynomial had meaning.
So because you can derive I, this is my logic, because you can derive I from insisting that a simple rotation matrix meets an invertibility criterion, and just derive I from that, and then turn it around and say as an axiom that all rotation matrices by definition are invertible. So whatever it takes for that to happen, happens, is set up within the number system itself.
Well, you can derive I from a rotational.
That's why I was suggesting people actually go through this proof themselves, because you get a simple two-dimensional rotation matrix, seriously as simple as possible. Invert it, learn the process of inversion, and realize, oh, it has to be I because it's basically x squared equals -1 is the solution. Once you go to get the eigenvalue, which is what you turn around to get the eigenvector with, which is why there was a change of heart on this, because our computers mostly function on this basis of invertibility. I mean, it's kind of why there's this thing in computers called a kernel, and in math. I mean, they're intimately connected.
Well, it's because it works.
We
don't really understand. We don't really understand how it works.
Okay, you don't have to remind me about that. I think I got that. Shouldn't have laughed there.
Well, I mean, you're just laughing at your own ignorance. That's why you're laughing. But I mean, so you're like, oh, you're a little bit smarter than a few other people, and therefore you laugh. But as opposed to actually wanting to understand what's going on and take the matter seriously, and you just pat yourself on the back for being a little bit smarter than a few other people.
I've got an example up on the board, and it is a possible counting system that has to do with the QMPT, which I slightly went into. Would have prepared more had I known, but I really honestly thought what he wanted to talk about had to do with historical development of the system. But this is basically what his presentation. So you said you don't really watch the presentation. Is that it?
I didn't watch it. I was busy with other things, and it wasn't. I mean, you have to get. I mean, for me to watch it, you have to give like a table of contents or some sort of mapping out. So it was just too long. And I mean, maybe if it was in the video in the beginning and he said, had like a table of contents or at least mapped out what he was going to do. But then I tried moving forward and I couldn't really follow what he was doing. So, you have to timestamp or create a table of contents or something for me to watch that. Otherwise, I can't just watch like long stuff that it's unclear where it's going or what's going on.
Yeah, it's about making a counting system with information-rich primitives so that the problems associated with the fact that the quintic doesn't have a solution go away. So that's what I'm hoping for here. So it's a way to connect microstates with numbers more directly, and dimensionality, obviously, of course. That's the most important thing, is a chunking limit. So I don't know, can you see the image I've got there, like how it's broken down in dimensions and how you have 10, quote, right angles, if you count that way?
Yeah.
So that would be like a decimal, not an approximation, but this is a way to build dimensional information into a counting principle that doesn't actually, hopefully doesn't go past 4. I don't know if that's actually possible, but yeah. Doesn't go past the measurement limit. I won't say 4, but let's just say hopefully doesn't go past the measurement limit. So I think what Euler had was, it was interesting at the beginning, but it really wasn't practical enough. So it was just like a good exposition, I think, of how math works and how it doesn't work at the same time, because it was really interesting to see how something that was very similar to the Taylor series be built into numbers themselves, but then when the correspondence broke down, it was like trying to sort of wallpaper over the problems, which is where we get this decoupling between computability and conceptualability or whatever. That's what we want to avoid.
I thought you were playing a video actually in the beginning, and I realized it was actually him talking. So I watched like the first 10 minutes of it in 2 time, and then I started speeding through it, and I thought you were just playing a video, and then eventually I heard you talking, and I realized that was actually him talking live.
He was doing a whiteboard. So it looks like Euler was around from 1707 to 1783. And Descartes was around a century prior. So they do look like they were decontroversialized by virtue of computers in a lot of ways.
Well, I don't know they're decontroversialized. They were canonized because they work for phenomenon. So we had equations and solutions that work and that use them. And so there was never really a solution, like to even Descartes or originally, or to the meaning of those. So like from the philosophy of mathematics, imaginary numbers are still a mystery. They just work for computation and engineering. So, so to say, for the sake of engineering, it just matters that it works. And once you had things that used it and worked, and made predictions, then even if it doesn't physically or philosophically make sense, that's the scientific method doesn't need an explanation. The scientific method just needs predictions that work, equations and theorems without an explanation. So, basically, imaginary numbers are still as mysterious and ununderstood as they ever were. They just clearly work for many observed and even human engineered phenomenon. Signal processing, computers, electricity, magnetism, Schrodinger's equation, all these things, actively use it, even though there really is no understanding. You get into the philosophy of mathematics to understand what these mean. And if you study the philosophy of mathematics, you would see that we really don't actually understand what these mean. And so you could be like, okay, I have a degree in mathematics. Of course we understand what these things mean. But like, no, I mean, you haven't really studied the philosophy then, or read through the literature to know that we don't actually understand what it means. We just know that it works.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's kind of like electricity, magnetism, and any of these things. We don't really understand the phenomenon. We just were able to mathematically describe it and even harness its use for our own uses. So we were able to describe the phenomenon, to master the phenomenon, that we could replicate the phenomenon and create our own uses and benefit based on the phenomenon, even though we don't understand the phenomenon. So that's why I'm coming to like a multiple truth hypothesis. I'm saying that no, I mean that really dualism is factual, and I'm trying to use some form of multiple truth hypothesis to lay out a theory of mathematics, science, engineering that would be dualistic, and saying that these phenomenon do not actually happen in the material realm, and what implication that would have for science. It could possibly have predictions and implications of saying that of differentiating what phenomenon happen in the material realm and what phenomenon happen in the non-material realm. So like T-jump, most mathematicians, most physicists are materialists, and like the hard problem of consciousness, believe that the phenomenon of imaginary numbers, electricity, magnetism, light, are material phenomenon. But yeah, that's why I'm coming to reject that these are not actually material phenomenon, and our own mathematics and description of how these phenomenon work are better explained in non-material terminology. And I don't think a scientist or mathematician could really argue with it. All they could say is that, look, we could create magnets, we could create electricity, we could create signals, and we use imaginary numbers to do it. And they believe that these phenomenon are material, but it's just like the hard problem of consciousness. They just believe that the phenomenon are material, and that's why I'm coming to disagree. And then you got to go like Descartes and the history of it, because it's just the assumption that like, oh, Doovid's a moron, like what's he talking about? Everyone knows, but it's like, no, everybody doesn't know this. They don't actually teach you this stuff in math and science classes. They just teach you the phenomenon, how it works, how to solve the equations, how to replicate the phenomenon, but they don't actually teach you to understand the phenomenon. And it's not even part of the science or math to try to explain what's behind the phenomenon, because it's largely beyond math and science to explain that.
Well, excluding consciousness because it's subjective is a bit of a problem. I'd really like it if everyone could vote.
Are you still caught up in these terminology where you're like you're using mysterious, like infinity versus the square root of -1, and you're saying that?
Are you trying to tell me there aren't degrees of mysteriousness?
Well, I mean, mysterious. I don't. Mysterious is, I guess, it's subjective. It's a matter of mind. I'm saying an objective system, even without minds, you could explain infinity in a purely material system. You can't explain imaginary numbers in a purely material system.
I just did. Condition of invertibility of a fucking rotation matrix. That's literally more in tune with reality than infinity.
That's not an explanation. You're just talking about a mathematical.
It's a justification.
No, it's not. I mean, you're just talking about a mathematical permutation of it, but it's not an explanation of the phenomenon. What is it?
It's a justification of why it's necessary. We haven't even got to saying what numbers are yet.
You don't. It doesn't need to. I mean, you could justify just saying this is what it is. So if you say it doesn't exist, how mysterious
something is depends on how many applications it has. How many applications does infinity have?
Mysterious is a subjective term.
Says you.
I mean, you're still caught up in like ego, just understanding the phenomenon separate of you. That like a speck of nothing. My death means nothing. when I eventually leave this world, it's basically completely meaningless that I was ever here. But there is an objective phenomenon to understanding the material and spiritual realm that's completely separate of me, even though there's me in my mind thinking about it. And you could use our minds to communicate, or because obviously me and you talking about it, it's subjective because we're the ones talking about it, but we're trying to talk about objective things. And so mysterious is mind dependent. So there's the fact
Says
of how
just because you associate mysteriousness with emotions doesn't make it mind dependent,
I
whatever
didn't
the hell
say
that
emotions.
means, and doesn't make it like subjective in the way you're alluding.
Well, I said mind dependent, and
You're saying
mind
mysteriousness
doesn't
is
imply
something that depends on a person's opinion.
emotions.
And I'm saying it doesn't depend on a person's opinion what's mysterious, although there is variation within what's considered mysterious. It's the boundaries of it are not arbitrary in the sense of random.
Listen, there's objective rules, equations, understandings of how all phenomena operate. They're only mysterious to us. They're not mysterious. They're mysterious to us.
Yeah, and
If
the
this is the
impressions.
rule of how phenomena operate,
Mhm.
the rules of how the phenomena operate are not mysterious. They're only mysterious in relationship to us and our
And
understanding of them.
their relationship to us is the only thing we're capable of understanding, if anything at all.
Yeah, so I'm saying you belittle them, you waste time, and you slow progress by focusing on our relationship to it.
The relationship is
So you say
the
hypothetically, me and you
simulation,
are
though.
talking about ideas, and these ideas are not dependent on me and you. So you just talk about them as objective in a system that doesn't include me and you, even though me and you are talking about them.
Well, there's a bit of an issue with considering things objective, and you're saying, well, there's no subjectivity in something objective. It's unclear what that means.
Mind independent.
That doesn't exist.
That's your so to say postulate.
If panpsychism is true, everything's mind dependent.
So that's your postulate. So I mean, you're working with that postulate, and then so you're kind of necessitating putting forward your own theories into everything. I mean, classically, panpsychism
Everyone
is
does
not,
that.
Classical mathematics, philosophy, panpsychism is not accepted, and there is understood to be something objective and mind dependent, and that would be the laws of math and science. They're mind independent. And so you're postulating you're from a school of panpsychism, and so therefore you're incapable of speaking in the accepted terminology of mainstream science. So you can't say something mind independent because nothing's mind independent. And so you're therefore you need to posit a theory that mainstream science doesn't accept in order to talk about anything, and you're incapable of talking about something in the mainstream way that science and math talks about things, and it's objective is because it's mind independent.
What good is it if I tell people that it's possible for stuff to be mind independent if it's not?
Well, you have to separate your own understanding
Do
from.
I? What about
Well, you don't have
everybody
to, but I
else?
think that's why.
How about everybody else does it and I'll be the last in line?
Well, I mean, saying that's why you're nobody with that gets 10 people watching you. So you say, okay, you have your theories, you have your ideas, and you have your understanding, and then there's the mainstream understanding. And if you can't use the mainstream terminology to explain it,
I just did. It's not my fault it maps to the empty set. If you want to say something that's independent of opinion, okay. That's all subjective.
I didn't say opinion, I said mind. You can't even say back what I said properly.
It's a way to rephrase the mind independence thing to make me be okay with saying it.
I'm not worried about you being okay with saying it.
It appears that you are, because you're lecturing me on my technical use of terminology and saying I'm bringing my beliefs into it, and I'm saying, well, everyone does that, and why is it only a problem when I do it?
because you're not capable of separating and saying, these
Neither
are my
are
beliefs,
you.
and these
And at least
are...
I'm able to say what my suppositions are explicitly, unlike everyone else.
No, you aren't. You can't say that. I mean, that's why I came up with the multiple truth hypothesis. And you just say, these are my axioms, this is my understanding versus the mainstream understanding. And so I'm not always going to explain things according to my understanding, because almost no one agrees with my understanding. So I explain things generally with the mainstream understanding. And then if it's relevant to someone who's interested in my understanding, I will bring in my understanding. But no, I mean, generally, I will phrase things according to the mainstream understanding, as opposed to you, who's always trying to frame it according to your frame, even though almost no one agrees with your frame. And that's why you're unintelligible to basically everyone. And saying, like, you could have your own theorems, and just, you're just like, okay, like if you're speaking French to someone who doesn't speak French, you have to translate it. And to constantly put things in your frame when almost no one agrees with your frame, you're unintelligible. And that's why people just ignore you, and don't take you seriously, because you're unintelligible.
You mean mysterious?
And I mean, you could, try to make, like a cult, like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm so mysterious, that no one could understand me.
It's more of a test of devotees, which I've
Yeah,
said
I
about
mean,
a
but
quadrillion times. And it's just, it doesn't get
I'm
across.
saying this nonsense, because you have no devotees.
That's cute.
I mean, you're like Gandalf. Like, I mean, you don't even have like a single person in your chat that will stand up and say that they're your devotee. So I mean, just like fantasies in your mind, and say like you're the only victim because you waste your own time, you waste other people's time, and you waste your own time. And just like saying, like, I'm not going to keep on bugging you to publish, but you will never publish until you could explain things according to mainstream terminology. And if your ideas are incapable of being explained in mainstream terminology, then you have to at least axiotize what it is different about the mainstream understanding versus your understanding. And then if you're going to say that whatever phenomenon you're trying to observe that could be explained according to your according to your axioms, that can't be explained according to the mainstream axioms. So I mean, that burden is upon you, and you can have some fantasy in your head where you think you're right, like Gandalf, like you're just smarter than everybody, and like even though you're poor and only a few hundred people even know who you are, that you still think that you're the only one who understands these things.
If I thought I was the only one who understood them, I wouldn't bother teaching them.
Yeah, unsuccessfully, because there's no one that you've taught. I mean, so okay, if you taught like basic physics or math concepts according to a mainstream understanding, but like no, you have no devotees that could explain things according to your understanding. Like zero. There's no one in your own chat that's going to step up and say that.
Who wants to take on that burden?
Well, I mean, because they just either don't care. I mean, it's like okay, you're wasting time, they're wasting time, and
we should talk about math instead of you ranting about like this sort of
you took low
hormonal
birth,
nonsense.
you could be happy with like a few minor accomplishments, and pat yourself on the back for being a little bit smarter than than the common person, and that's enough for you and a few people to hang out. But like time's ticking by and your accomplishments aren't racking up. And so like the LARP, see, that's all it was. That just God forbid, as opposed to actually making progress, actually discovering something, actually publishing.
And we talked to what's his name last time?
Jason Torn, who was willing to bet money that you were going to fail.
Yeah, he
Talked to him
said
for
he'd
a
pass
few
my
hours,
work along.
and the conclusion of it was that he would put his own money on the line that you will fail.
But he explicitly said that it was like reverse psychology, whereas what you're doing sounds like malign encouragement. I know it's not that, but it's
Well, I'm saying
counterproductive at this
what's worth
point.
something, what's not worth something. So, Torn is saying that he'll be your friend even though you're going to fail. So he's saying like, okay, Jennifer, like, I don't really think you know what you're talking about. You're not really onto something. But like, we're trying to encourage women to be into math and science, even though you're not very good at it. And, it's kind of fun to, have someone with crazy ideas just to talk to.
You think it's reverse sexism?
Well, no, I mean, he's basically saying that your ideas aren't really science. You're not really onto anything, but he just kind of enjoys joking around with you because he likes to waste time sometimes. But in terms of like math or science, if he was doing that, like, he wouldn't waste his time with you. And he said that straight up. I mean, you could watch the video. Said that anyone, he knows seriously in the physics community would say, why are you wasting your time with this? And, he even was willing to bet his own money that you're going to fail. So he just said he enjoys your company. He loves you because of, whatever, because social things that have nothing to do with science. Is basically what he's saying. Like, okay, like, I like you as a friend, even though you're not really a serious scientist. Your ideas are really not scientific. You're not onto anything. And that's how I interpret what he was saying. And so, like, no, I'm saying that I'm still trying to help you put your ideas forward, and that's what I'm just harping on. Like, you have to be able to explain your ideas not in the terminology of your own theory, like a circular logic. Objective.
Which, according to my own theory, doesn't exist. So you're saying, do something impossible, please. And I'm saying,
because
that's impossible, though.
You mean, so the main, like, Torn, because your own theory is bullshit.
What does it mean for something to be objective?
Because you're not really onto anything.
Do objects have
you don't
any
actually
reality?
Have any understanding.
On the one hand, you're saying objects don't have reality, and on the other hand, you're saying define something objectively. I can't reconcile those two. So start by telling me what are the criteria for objective.
Objective means mind dependent. You should do T-Jump or something. Like, I don't like doing this. I mean, T-Jump enjoys like calling people idiots and morons. I don't know why I have to do this. Just do a debate with T-Jump so he could call you an idiot and moron, and I don't have to do it.
Sorry,
what the hell? I got to repeat. I got to repeat like T-Jump, like the basic philosophy.
You endlessly ragging on me doesn't serve a purpose. Us talking about math and stuff, that does seem to serve a purpose.
Yeah, I'm not trying to rag on you. It's trying to.
It sounds like that to me.
I mean, it could be because, like, because it's, God forbid, it's.
Nothing is stopping you from learning it and writing the paper yourself, except yourself. So who's the one superstitiously afraid of change? Me or you? Anyway, so as it turns out, my theory may not be new, and maybe it's the main use of AI. Curious if this is actually true, but yeah, this is in the article I just posted. It's a density functional theory. Yeah. Hate to have to cede that one to the flat earthers. Yeah. I need to stop thinking that it's their opinion of me that matters. That's what my advice is in general. It just kind of seems like you want to win the argument, and then if I start winning it, then I'm somehow cheating.
No, I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm trying to understand ideas.
You're saying better. You have to say it in terms of something being objective when a bunch of people are going to deny the reality of objects, and you're not going to acknowledge that that's an issue or tell me how to get past that. So it's kind of like,
You
okay,
really
but
can't get past that because, like, no. So I said, like,
it's
I
not
don't
me
have
that can't
to
get past
filter
it. It's
everything through my own ideas. I could hear someone's idea and say their idea as is
you
without
think you
filtering it through
can.
my
You
own
think you can,
understanding.
but you can't. You think you can, but you can't. You have
Well,
the
yeah, I can
impression
try
that you
my
can,
best.
but you
I don't
can't.
have
You're
to
trying.
filter
Oh,
everything through
trying.
my
How
own
well do you think you're
understanding.
succeeding? I wonder how well you think you're succeeding. Compare yourself to someone better and see how well you're succeeding. Can you see anyone better? No, because you've already presumed that you've succeeded. Mistake number one. Never
I think I
presume you've
generally
succeeded.
succeeded. Even
Never
Ben
presume the
Watkins
conclusion.
was, said, straight up, I said over correctly um, his frame. I mean, I think most of the people I speak with would say that, like, I relatively correctly say over what they're saying. I don't have to filter it through my own
Yeah,
opinion. I could give my opinion on
sure.
it, but I could separate myself from the idea and just say over the idea and someone else's understanding without needing to filter it through myself.
Yet somehow you think I'm not better than you at that. Irony.
I don't know, like, a better or worse. It's not. I mean, not a. I mean, it's not a
If you
competition.
cared, you'd
And
know
if
I
it
was
is a
already good at it.
competition,
It's
you would
not a
have to
competition, but
reduce
you're
it to some
making it
sort of
one. You're making
psychometric.
it a competition by the way you're addressing me.
No, I mean, it's not a competition. I don't see what you said. There's no competition here.
You're saying, can you step outside of the opinion you're expressing? You're saying, I can't do that. And I'm saying, you're only presuming you can do it. You only have the impression you can do it. You don't have any actual verification that you can do it. What's your best verification?
Well, you have to use some sort of psychometric to
Self-delusion is not a psychometric.
I mean, like, if it depended on the hard problem of consciousness to understand what it is even that we're talking about and how would you measure the phenomenon.
Exactly. It's always going to be a decoupling when you get to self-reference with the accuracy of things. Hermendes asks, what are some good books I might like? I'm assuming that's to you, Doovid. Any recommendations? That's
I'm not really
broad.
sure. I'm not. Don't know. You'd have to. I mean, there's a lot of good books. You could watch last week's. The 2 weeks week in review, and I showed a lot of books. All books are basically good. I don't know your background or, like a recommendation, like what type of books you've already read. What's your educational background? What you're trying to study or learn.
My idea as it stood was, and another idea that might actually be good that I just thought of right now is getting in touch with the guy from, I forget his name now. He's working in the UK, I think. McFadden, John Joe McFadden. He would probably be the best person to talk to about publishing. My actual theory. Because, like, based on what our friend said, Mr. Chase and Dorn, it's going to be a dead end to do it in chemistry. Or am I reading that wrong?
Well, I mean, he sounded pretty pessimistic that you would publish, period. But, I mean, first you need a paper. So, I mean, you just want advice about publishing.
Putting stuff to writing is a problem for me.
Yeah, but it's saying, like, okay, like, once you have a paper, then it's very easy to seek out your work on publishing. So without even a paper, I'm not sure you might be premature to seek people's advice with publishing. So, I mean, first you need help writing a paper. And then once you actually have a paper, then you could worry about publishing it.
Well, it looks like 80% of people find infinity more mysterious. And granted, that's probably only 4 people, so probably not accurate.
Well, it's just a poll, and what does even mysterious mean? I wasn't even disagreeing. I just said, like, like, I wasn't talking about mysterious or not.
I didn't think you were disagreeing. It was just a question that popped into my head as to whether people's first subjective impression was that zero, or no, infinity or I was more mysterious. Because you were making I out to be some sort of, it seemed like you were making it out to be some sort of proof of, I don't want to say heaven, but of some
Dualism, and
dualism. Yeah, that's the term you use.
I mean, you seem to reject the simple premise that that I cannot be represented in the material realm as where infinity could be represented in the material realm.
I just challenged that infinity had representation in the material. Peter Beck asked if Chopra's ideas are close to mine. It's like, well, does he have my same understanding of things? No. Would he disagree with anything I said? I don't know. Not to ask him. He's pretty milk toast, in my opinion.
I don't read fiction. I say primitives. I sell fiction just because my dad has a whole bunch of it and keeps on giving me more and more of these boxes. Fiction's more common. Most people read fiction, but like I don't read fiction. If you read like science fiction, so I don't have any recommendations in that, or you maybe recommend not reading fiction. So if you're talking about like something to help with your studies, then I have to like know where you're holding, what your studies are for a book, your studies. If you wanted like, if you told me your likes or like authors or something, I might be able to tell you good books like based on, not that I read, but just based on sales or what's popular among other people or various things. But I'd almost I didn't take a vow, but I renounce myself from all forms of entertainment, which includes music and fiction and television, entertainment of any form. So I would put fiction in a form as entertainment, and time is short. Say like, okay, if you took low birth and like you accomplished a little bit more than your birth would expect you to, so you have some sort of satisfaction that based on your birth, your level of accomplishment is higher than than most people who have your similar level of birth, as opposed to some sort of objective standard of what you would consider a worthy accomplishment, and then you might consider renouncing entertainment in all forms, like renouncing humor and the various things. You just say that time is short, and big accomplishments basically require a lifetime of effort, and there's really not much time to waste, and so you have to renounce yourself from things like entertainment in general, at least limit them. You even get to the point of say renouncing yourself from laughter, but I mean certainly minor forms of renouncement from entertainment. Your average person in America spends like 6 to 8 hours a day watching entertainment television, like sitcoms, movies, and even news. Sports is basically entertainment. Like the Super Bowl, basically entertainment. So you'd have to consider renouncing yourself from these things.
Is there anything you haven't taken a vow of renunciation from? But
well, I didn't take a vow
about it.
Well, I say from entertainment in all forms. Like without a vow, I renounce myself from entertainment of all forms.
That's cool.
And so that would be like music, television, sitcoms, movies, comedy, sports. Not saying that like exercise, health, some news, but it was largely, it's like, God forbid, the diamond dealer that I drove, who was, business partners with Ivanka Trump, that told me music's for poor people. And I remember it was kind of a shocking statement when he told me that, but I thought about it and saw that he's right. And I saw my father said that he used to
Music
listen.
has long been considered a sign of high culture. So I can see where that opinion comes from, but I don't think that's a across the board high
Well, I mean, he was
society.
also musical, but I'm saying, I mean, generally, uh, um, music as a form of entertainment is, is for poor people. That you could take high birth and still waste your time, and just because you take high birth, but it's, if you take lowered birth, um, you reach certain levels of accomplishment. It's like, oh, I got a degree, like, oh, like I became a millionaire, like, oh, I wrote a paper, and it's, because you took lower birth, that's like a big accomplishment. You did more than your parents, you did more than you were expected to, you did more than your teachers, as opposed to, like Hilbert and the problems, saying or pushing knowledge forward, and saying, like, no, you did not push knowledge forward, you did not discover something new. All you did was accomplish more than you were expected to accomplish. And
I
so that,
also screwed this diagram up. Couldn't even get a diagram right and put this back line too long. Chopped off the middle circle. I mean, screw.
I don't say all people go to heaven eventually, but say all souls are pure and return to the Maker. So, like, yeah, I mean, most of the Kabbalists say that, like, the ultimate reward will be shared by all people. There might be a purgatory process. I'm not talking about good or bad in terms of, so I mean, a lot of the Kabbalists say, uh, I'll tell two quick rabbi stories, maybe like a lighter tone, and even, telling stories is a minor form of, I mean, it's not really entertainment, but it's a lesser form of information. I think I told the first one before of, I forget the name of a rabbi, contemporary rabbi, and he had been the top student in yeshiva, and he married the daughter of a wealthy businessman who brought him to his town to be the rabbi of the town, and said that he would support him in his studies, and that he just expected him to continue, doing what he was doing in his studies and in his diligence. And then a few years later, he was the rabbi of the town, and the father of the law cuts him off, and he says, "You're not holding your part of the deal." And so the guy said, "What are you talking about? I know 100 times more than everybody else in this town." And so his father-in-law tells him, "I wasn't comparing you to the people in this town. I was comparing you to the people in the academy that you studied with." And to say that, you came to this town where people took low birth and don't know a lot, and just the fact that you know 100 times more than them, uh, like, but no, you start slacking your studies compared to if you had stayed in the academy. And I mentioned a lot of times, like, magician versus mason, that when you're in the lodge, you're a mason because the trick isn't a trick, it's science, and it's some phenomenon that your fellow masons understand, that this is how you did it, and it was done through understanding of science and phenomenon. But when you're in the countryside, people don't understand science, they just think it's magic. So the same thing in the lodge that you would explain with, like, a chalkboard and equations and algorithmic processes to do this, do that. On the countryside, you're just like, oh, like, you're a magician. How did you ever do that? And you could say, like, you're never going to figure out how I did it. Like, I studied in the academy for decades. Like, there's no way you're ever going to understand it. You could just look at me as a magician. And then the other story related specifically to what you're saying, but I was making the point of the level of accomplishment, that, okay, you were in university, and if you were in a period of elites, most gatherings of elites are temporarily or false, because you can't really have a gathering of elites, because people have to function in greater society, and you can't separate the elites. So temporarily, maybe in university, you have a bunch of great minds, and then you separate and go out in your different directions. And so your level of accomplishment compared to the academy, to when being around people that don't really understand this stuff, so how do you gauge yourself? And you say, okay, if you took low birth and you got into MIT, and it's, oh, such a great accomplishment, I got into MIT, and then you go back to your town and you become a millionaire and a prominent person in your society, and like, and no one, like, because you don't understand how computers work and technology and civics and government, and have all these connections. But if you compare yourself to the people that you were contemporaries with in academy, that your accomplishments may not be that good, or like took high birth. That if you're a country boy with a high IQ, and you accomplish a lot, and next thing you know, you're in the same class with the king's son and all these various things, and they say, but eventually you leave the academy and go back to your to the countryside, and now you've been promoted to nobility. But that at that point, instead of benchmarking yourself based on the other people of the country, on the countryside, you benchmark yourself with the people in the academy, with the people in the Royal Society. And so that's the main point I'm trying to stress to Jennifer. And then specifically related to your point, I think they say this in the name of the Vilna Gaon, who said basically what you're saying, that all people get the same reward. So the people in the the yeshiva, called the academy, where they're doing the advanced studies, and I guess they're outside and they're looking at, like, like the groundskeeper or something, like like a basic employee, and saying, why are we doing all this if this person's going to have the same reward that we're doing? Why are we grilling ourselves in the academy if in the next life the reward of this person's going to be the same? And the rabbi's answer was, you're doing it for a better life in this world, that to understand these concepts, to have a better understanding of reality, even if your reward in the next world is the same as the people who didn't understand it. The reward is in this world for understanding these things. And at a certain point, it's not even about high birth or low birth. He was, okay, I took low birth and I worked really hard as a youth, and I got into the academy, and then I saw these people who took high birth, and Hilbert, and the problems that are important to humanity, and I was able to understand the current state of knowledge and all the deep pressing issues. And then like the Torah, you say, like, lishma, for its own sake. I came to desire wisdom and understanding for its own sake, not because I wanted to take higher birth, not because I wanted to reach nobility or do important things, but I just saw information, knowledge is valuable for its own sake. And this little ego pat on my back, like, oh, good job, like, I figured something else out that no one else understood, is worthless, is meaningless. And that's partially like the taking low birth, because like, there's a pleasure in exceeding expectations, and if you have low expectations, it's very easy to exceed expectations. But it's not really an accomplishment. I mean, it's an accomplishment to exceed expectations, but once you've been to the academy, once you've seen Hilbert and the problems, once you've seen the current state of humanity and the current state of knowledge, and want to push it forward, and even if you do, like, even if you successfully do that, there's no real time, it's no benefit to pat yourself on the back, and then when you go back to the countryside and you exceeded everyone else's expectations, and like, how'd you do that? And there's diminishing pleasure. One thing, like, even if you get enjoyment out of it, it's diminishing, and it's not real enjoyment. Saying the enjoyment of exceeding expectations, or of performing better than your peers, of winning a competition, is not it's not a pure form of enjoyment. And really, it comes down to bad character. They're saying the purest character, the purest good, is to advance ideas for the pure sake of understanding and advancing ideas, not for the sake of winning, not for the sake of exceeding expectations, not for the sake of social standing or honor or any of those things. So that's my little ramble there.
Can you see what I've got on the screen? This color coding of emotion?
Yeah, I see Parmenides now. So rich people have a lot of pressure on them, but not all that. With the expression high birth, low birth doesn't just refer to money. So, okay, like that, if you were the king's son, theoretically, we really don't have these things. And I've been reading these books on mathematics, and I'll let Jennifer explain this, where you historically had the Royal Society, and you had, like the king who was able to direct the resources of the nation and was able to really bring the greatest scientists and minds together to work on these things, so that like Hilbert, Euler, uh, you could look maybe like an internet culture, like me, Jennifer, JF, T Jump, like a current days Royal Society. But historically, there was a king who had the power of the budget and the army and the most pressing issues in the kingdom, that they would bring together the greatest minds. And if it was solving things like cartology, maps, engineering things, and if you were really smart on the countryside, you would eventually make your way to the Royal Society, and then you would understand the current state of governance and these issues that face humanity and why they're important and all these things to work on. So if you're Newton, or even all these people took low birth, and then you make it to the Royal Society, and then maybe you get paid, maybe now you're a millionaire, maybe you're prominent, a member of the aristocracy, and so it's not just like being rich or part of the marry the king's daughter. There's, well, what about the actual questions? What about the actual current state of understanding and pushing knowledge forward, answering the questions that haven't been answered, like the hard problem of consciousness? So, okay, like you're a poor, country boy, you took low birth, you didn't even hear the hard problem of consciousness. None of your contemporaries or peers.
And who's fit to solve the problem of consciousness?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That is saying that's worthy of your effort, and to say, okay, you might make it to the Royal Society, you might make it to the Academy, and they might talk about the hard problem of consciousness, but you're going to become an aristocrat or a millionaire or wealthy from solving a more pressing issue that faces society. Like some engineering thing that does something for a bunch of people, and then maybe you get your standing, maybe you get your money, and you get known by something. But when you're in the academy, you're going to have the list of all the unsolved questions, and so it's like Hilbert. Hilbert, was the head of the academy, and they got together like week in review, and he gave a speech every week, and other people listened.
Are you saying I'm
sometimes
not giving enough speeches every week? Like, come on.
no,
What
well,
if
I'm
you're not saying that?
well, no, I'm talking just about really the masonry of the system. So if you're in the academy and you have the charter, you have to remind people, you have to teach. And if you've successfully taught people, you've taught them up to the current state of knowledge. And so you have your university, and then you have the academy. So in the old day, the Royal Academy was above the university. So you had the people who had mastered the current state of knowledge, and they would be brought to the academy because they already had a mastery of the current state of knowledge, and they would be expected to answer the questions that no one else could answer. And you had brilliant minds like Euler and Newton and Leibniz that answered hundreds of these questions that no one else could answer. And so as a teacher, you have to teach people the basics from the beginning. But if you have really good students, or you get to the Royal Academy, to the central house, uh, you're going to get people up to date on the most current problems that are ununderstood, and you're going to have to dedicate a certain amount of time towards solving what's unsolved. So yeah, if you're teaching, you could be repeating things over and over again of what's useful to your average person, like arithmetic, algebra, calculus, chemistry, physics. These things are useful to masses and masses of people. And then there's certain things, maybe like orchestrated reduction, or various things that most people are never going to understand. Most people are not going to have enough prerequisite knowledge to understand, let alone to push this knowledge forward. But like, yeah, the academy, that's what you need. You need to recruit people. You need to teach them, get them up to the basis, and then you have to solve these questions. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not about ego. I mean, the ego is a factor because humans are humans, but it's about solving these questions.
Which is why I mentioned mysticism earlier, that it's like, okay, let's say someone did solve Hilbert's sixth problem in theory, and nobody understood the solution. What then?
Well, I mean, part of the question implies that it's understandable by the academy. So, I mean, that's
Right. And
usually, saying that's the process of. So, I mean, if you could demonstrate if it's a solution that, I mean, so this is mathematics. If it's engineering, you have a device, and you can demonstrate that it works even if no one else understands it. So if you're talking about something mathematic or scientific, that it's theoretical and the solution is dependent upon other people understanding it. I mean, generally that's understood that the solution isn't solved until your knowledge is understandable by others, and so that the claim would be rejected. That you could file, so if you actually filed the solution and saying this is the solution, you tried to explain it, and no one else understood it, it would not be accepted as the solution. And there was cases like that, like Galois group theory. Galois was, God forbid, died in the duel, and it wasn't till uh, Louisville read his paper. I was just reading that earlier, that group theory in Galois now is pretty common. Even what you were showing earlier is probably based on Galois group theory, but and he was actually killed in a duel. But his work was written and then filed away, and then 50 years later, someone read it, and now is a fundamental basis of mathematics. But no, I mean, the solution isn't considered a solution till it's understood and accepted in the academy. And so if you think you have a solution, your solution isn't final until it's been understood and accepted, by at least the the academy, the people knowledgeable in the field.
yep, nice argument. Maybe consciousness makes Hilbert's sixth problem not able to be put forth in an axiomatic form, if at all. There may be something impossible about the way it's phrased, in theory.
I mean, sometimes you could solve it by saying it's unsolvable also, like the quintic.
Yeah, like that was just what I was thinking of. It's like, what does it mean to prove? Because I don't buy Gödel's proof, but I do accept the notion of proving something by reductio ad absurdum is a valid under certain circumstances. What does it mean to sort of legitimately disprove something? That's why I was curious about the disproof the quintic, because
formula that, I mean, if you have ax to the fifth plus bx to the fourth plus cx to the third plus dx squared plus ex plus
it's
f
whether it can be
equals 0.
Decomposed, right?
Well,
it's whether it admits factorial decomposition necessarily, like with the y equals plus or minus or whatever the quadratic decomposition is.
So I'm saying there's a quintic and a quadric solution like the quadratic formula, and they're long. So I mean, if you could put up on Wikipedia or something, or just some solution. But I mean, the solution to the quintic is each equation is like a full line long, and has like multiple cube roots in the quintic also. And so just demonstrated that there is no algebraic solution to the quintic. So it doesn't mean that there's no solution to the quintic. I mean, obviously you could graph it, and you could see the solutions, or you could estimate. There's statistical methods to get the solution, but to say that there's not going to be a formulaic solution for it, and even like
the idea is you can brute force some stuff, but the self-reference of the computations becomes overwhelming to the computational capacity of the computer carrying out the calculation rather quickly.
Well, I'm gonna say you could put in a quintic onto Wolfram Alpha and it'll solve it for you. That's not
Well,
what
that's
it's saying.
basically a supercomputer. That's not disproving, or it's not anything against what I said. That's
I mean, you're
actually
T81, but it's saying when you said they
okay.
proved that you couldn't solve it, you meant that you proved that you couldn't come up with a pluggable formula based on the coefficients to provide the solution. Didn't mean that it's unsolvable, that you can't get the answer to the solutions to the quintic. It meant that there was no formula solution that you could plug in the coefficients that would give you the solution, like the quadratic formula.
I guess the way I understood it was whether it admitted a factorial decomposition. If that's not what it means, then it's not quite as interesting as I thought. But one thing that was interesting.
Because you're anachronizing.
Am I? I got into a conversation about this.
I mean, there's a factual history of how these ideas came about and what people were working on and why these questions. You didn't study the history of mathematics, and generally your understanding is weaker because there was a reason why things were discovered in the times they were, why certain things people worked on for hundreds of years, and so if you're trying to anachronize using modern mathematical methods, to solve something that took hundreds of years of the greatest minds to solve, and even it should make sense that
where am I anachronizing exactly? What is this word here? What's going on?
Anachronizing, I mean, you're putting something back in time that wasn't there.
It appears that what bolstered the legitimacy of I was computational necessity, namely what I mentioned. Are you going to read that in a book? Likely no. I don't understand your point.
Yeah, but that's what I said. Solving polynomials.
It's not solving polynomials. It's solving a matrix.
No, I mean that's why you're anachronizing. You're solving polynomials because matrices didn't. That for hundreds of years, they were trying to solve polynomials and they didn't have matrices. So that's what I meant by you're anachronizing.
Do polynomials define diagonalization? Or do matrices define diagonalization? Wrong, because it's not written in a book. It's like, it's not wrong, it's not written in a book, Doovid. It's just something I thought of that's accurate that no one's going to be able to establish isn't accurate. I don't see what your problem is with what I said.
Well, I said you said exactly what you're doing. You're anachronizing.
Mm-hmm. No one can be established not to be doing that. So it's sort of pointless to say. Are you familiar?
Matrix are about 150 years old.
Right, and the acceptance of the I, how old is that?
About 400 years old.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, you do a lot better just listening. Like, it's not a competition. Like I said, you're just anachronizing, saying that I mean, I just did this research. I was trying to tell you what I researched this week, and you're trying to say
400 years ago is when? (1620) And when was I accepted?
I mean, Euler codified. I mean, that's why it's meant. Euler.
And how long did it take Euler's theories to be accepted?
Well, Euler was the second in charge of the Berlin Royal Academy, or the Prussian Royal Academy. So I mean, Euler. I mean, so there was a academic process where he had these theories, and there was an academy, and it was commissioned by Catherine or the monarch at the time, and so he was able to canonize many things like but I mean like it existed before. So it's saying Descartes saying even 400 years, that there was writing on I going back 1,500 years. Like Matrix is an invention of the last 200 years. It's saying the quintic, the cubic was solved 800 years ago, and that included what would have, in theory, have been the imaginary solutions that they just rejected. And even the quadratic equation in ancient times, they had the means to understand imaginary numbers. They just rejected it. So they had the quadratic formula, probably even in ancient times, and they just rejected the imaginary solution. And about 500 years ago, they started questioning maybe this imaginary solution shouldn't just be rejected, and maybe it has some use. And Euler,
Yeah, it's almost like it's equivalent to a matrix. It's like it's a number that's somehow equivalent to a matrix. How strange that it works so well.
well, because you're anachronizing. So you say, oh, what a great discovery Matrix was. Like had they known about these things in ancient
I
times.
question that a matrix has only been around for 150 years. I'm going to have to look into that.
Well, look into
Gauss,
it. I mean,
the Gaussian elimination algorithm. When did Gauss do his work? I mean, I thought that was the 1600s.
I don't think so. I mean,
I could be wrong. I tend to anachronize.
well, I mean, you tend to just be ignorant. Gauss is 1777 to 1850.
There you go.
And I mean, Gauss was also part of the Royal Academy.
And he did the matrices.
He had some of the work.
The Gaussian elimination algorithm is all about matrices. Daryl Frost asked, what difference does it make? Understanding computation, why it works, is important. If you don't see why, that's cool. Maybe sometime in the future you will.
Well, so Euler, Gauss, these laws coincide. I mean, because there was the Royal Academy and you had chemists, physicists, and mathematicians and engineers coming together, and they had, like a weekly demonstrations, and, they hung out there, or some of them were even paid to write papers and read papers. And then there were, matters of state that they were asked to solve, and questions to work on, that they were able to put information together. So they like imaginary numbers, like matrices, like magnetism and electricity, and so it pays to, that's so to say, your due diligence. And so you could discover something new without knowing the science of math. I mean, most scientists go on to learn the history of science and ideas, and usually it's telling that when these ideas come into understanding. So I mean, just even like matrices, like when do matrices come in? What ideas
With
they come
Gauss.
in relation
That's
to?
why the algorithm is named after him. Arguably, there's a guy who did it even earlier, but whatever.
She has a degree in physics. Like, you're like, but say, like, no. It's like, if you were in the academy, you would be expected to know this stuff.
Uh-huh. So it does not appear I was anachronizing. It appears I was dead on with my analysis then. But it is indeed...
You were anachronizing because you were using the matrix. You were...
That it is indeed the necessity of the invertibility of the rotation matrix that justified the I in perpetuity for engineering.
I mean,
because rotation is clearly important in engineering.
You were using a modern technique.
Responsible for legitimizing I, or one of the main people ascribed with its success. or to whom his success is attributed, whatever. Your extreme negativity is making it hard to focus. Memes is having fun in the chat there. Yeah, so I got 2 articles in the last couple weeks. I feel pretty good about that. And let me see what else. Have you heard of this problem before of the checker shadow illusion? Have we talked about this yet?
I know we talked about it. Like, yeah, I've seen it. It's a very common one. Just, I mean, there's a whole bunch of observational phenomenon where people are almost, like, I mean, where A and B are the same shade, the exact same color. But because A is next to a lighter color and B is next to a darker color, that it appears that B is lighter than A. I mean, it's a common observation problem. There's a whole bunch of them. In fact, it's in the book Grossbergian, the book of Conscious Mind, Resonant Brain. They have this exact same diagram. The guy Johann, who was doing the Grossbergian neuroscience lecture, used this diagram. There's a whole bunch of these type things that representative of observatory phenomenon of where the brain makes mistakes. To say that basically 100% of people, like we talked about the moon on the horizon, that there's something about this phenomenon that basically all minds interpret to think that B is lighter than A.
Right. So I got into a convo about this, and it was like turned into so long about whether it was about color or brightness. And I'm sitting there like, you can't say anything about colors based on this example because it's in grayscale. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned a few weeks ago Hubel and Weasel, who
did you understand what I said though? Did you get what I said? About how it's not an assertion about color, but it's an assertion about brightness?
Well, I mean, going back to what I said at the beginning about the statistical neurocorrelates of consciousness versus, the actual physical neurocorrelates of consciousness. So I mentioned the experiments of Hubel and Weasel a few weeks ago that won a Nobel Prize, and they God forbid tortured these rats and mice, showing the actual circuits in the brain versus horizontal and vertical lines, where they showed that there were different circuitry in the brain for processing horizontal and vertical lines, and they actually cut up like rats and cats to demonstrate the physical neurocorrelates of consciousness. And so they had phenomenon like this that people perceived incorrectly, and then they actually had the pure neurocorrelate of consciousness where they demonstrated that there's different sections of the brain that process horizontal versus vertical lines. I don't show but it said that they demonstrated evidentiary that I have to see the experiments later but I mean, they didn't actually show how the brain processed but they demonstrated that there was correlates in very specific parts of the brain, even dissectionary way for processing horizontal versus vertical lines. So if you're looking at a neurocorrelate of consciousness, if you're talking about a measurement of physics, where you're just like a statistical method or some sort of formulaic understanding of brightness versus color or contrast versus an actual neurocorrelate of consciousness, and it's saying that there's a structure of the brain that the brain perceives this phenomenon, not that phenomenon, as opposed to some sort of physical reason why one phenomenon would be more or easy to perceive.
Yeah, I guess so.
So I mean, you're just talking on the physics level. You're not talking.
What I'm talking about is that this example demonstrates an effect that cannot be isolated to be a color effect, but rather a contrast effect, which is not specifically color, because contrast is about brightness, absolute amplitude, not relative disposition of.
I'll get the book.
Who knows what book it will be? I hope at least one person knows what the F I'm talking about, because we're in the feeling like I'm taking crazy pills Mugatu from Zoolander. We're not there yet, but we're getting close. So I understand that thing is green, but the green part is not part, the cylinder thing is not part of the optical illusion, quote unquote. You fucking Daryl, fuck you. Fuck you, Daryl. Seriously, fuck you. I understand how you can argue that white and black are colors, but it's not the same thing. Just because we can compress images along what appears to be the same thing doesn't make it literally the same thing. You want to have... Okay, yes, go ahead. Let's hear it. Very interesting.
Okay, I mentioned this book. Stephen Grossberg, out of Boston University. I showed some of his videos in the previous weeks, and this is a new textbook on neuroscience, conscious mind, resident brain, how each brain makes a mind. And he has that exact same figure. Like he has a whole bunch of these phenomenon. That's not the exact same one that you were showing, but it's full of phenomenon like this that have perceptual tests that in laboratories, say like psychometric, where they show that people make mistakes and then actually equation form and even neuro tests like Hubble and Weasel of actually like dissections of brains. And color is also a phenomenon where they have tests that include different colorations. So look to see if you find it, but you could add to these things contrast and also color, and they do have different phenomenon, and these are various test or observatory things that they've used in laboratories to demonstrate certain phenomenon, and I'd have to look. They do have things with like red and green. There are certain perceptual phenomenon that are purely based on color. Some things like color blindness, like for example, if you have like orange and blue in the, like if you have a sign of certain colors, so if a person was colored blind, they couldn't see the symbol coded in the sign, or certain perceptual things where there's an image interlaid within an image and it's color based. So both phenomenon are true. Contrast might be a separate phenomenon. And then if you're going to actually...
What do you mean might be?
Well,
literally
because
ask anyone who's ever worked with Adobe Photoshop. There's no might be about it. They're different channels.
Well, and because you have two phenomena. You have cones and rods, and
literally nothing to do with that. It's to do with image encoding. It's a question of whether black and white are colors.
Yeah, but
they aren't.
Yeah, so if you're talking about like computer or so like objective mind independent, and if you're talking about something the mind, and you're talking about the neural correlates of the mind, obviously we have cones and rods, and the purpose of the cones is to decipher color.
That's completely unrelated to the topic.
Well, of course related. It's saying from a
colors exist independently of us.
NCC
You want to go on about this, all this mind independent. Colors are defined on intervals of frequencies of light, are they not? That's nothing internal.
Well, of course it is. That's why the cones in our eye work, that we
No.
have specific.
The fact that we can have the worst kind.
The human retina contains about 120 rod cells.
Perceived light does nothing but confuse the issue.
No, but it's a chemical reaction where the color
The fact that we
produces a chemical
perceive
signal.
colors
So
with chemicals has
green
no
or
bearing
red-
on the origin of colors, I'm afraid.
I was thinking it's a physical chemical phenomenon that the color produces a chemical signal and our brain perceives the color. There's over 6 million receptors in our brain that perceive color. I mean, in our eye. In just one eye behind here, there's 6 million separate receptors that pure use.
So what?
It produces a chemical signal so that there's 6 million cones right now in my eye that whatever color wavelength comes in that some of this is a precise understanding of neural correlates of consciousness, sense perception. We've went over this before. There's 100 million rods and 6 million cones in your eye.
So where do colors arise from?
Well, if you're asking like a philosophy of science, it doesn't matter. If you just define color as a wave of the phenomenon of so you don't need to understand what color actually is. If you just define it as it's the wave signal that's converted into electric signal when that wavelength hits one of the millions of the receptors.
So basically you're saying it doesn't matter whether colors originate in the brain or completely external to people.
We're saying that this green on the screen that I'm looking at.
Well, that sounds like what you're saying, but you won't even stand by that now? I mean, did you not just say it doesn't matter?
Well, it's saying that if you look at a scientific phenomenon, the green will send out a signal of a wavelength of about 550 nanometers. And of the 6 million cones in my eye, maybe, I'm not sure, a few 100,000 of those will produce a chemical signal if it receives something at 550 nanometers. And then that will produce a chemical reaction that will be translated into an electric signal that will enter my brain. Some of the contrast is something different. So the green, so if you're looking at understanding the neural correlates, you're saying
the contrast is the only thing that's been established to be an effect in this particular effect.
Why someone thinks that A is darker than B
has fuck all to do with colors, i.e. blue, Roy G. Biv. It doesn't have anything to do with Roy G. Biv colors. Just saying. Because there's no Roy G. Biv colors in that diagram other than the green, which is not in any way related. That the color of that green thing could be any color. It wouldn't change the information of the diagram. And it has no bearing on anything. Do you understand my point? Because I was trying to account for this effect here. Like, I was trying to say why this happened based on, basic reasoning. And I couldn't get the people to concede that it had nothing to do with color. It had to do with contrast. Maybe, I don't know, they couldn't understand what I was saying or something.
Well, so you're going to explain that according to the actual biological mechanisms in the brain, or are you explaining that according to
well, hopefully both. I mean, ideally it would be you want to have all the angles to get the full understanding, like the multiple truth hypothesis idea. I would first want to establish and agree on what it is, which is a contrast effect. and then also say that our eyes are detecting contrast and color contrast. There's contrast between colors, and then there's contrast, and those are different things.
Yeah, so I mean, the perception requires shape, boundary, and you would call shade and color.
And you could
So-
say that, a shape and a boundary is some type of contrast, but then you're sort of splitting hairs. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I would just say you need a boundary.
Well, I mean,
and
you
then
need
a
contrast for
shape.
shape, and you need contrast
And
for
having a
boundaries
shape
in general.
implies a contrast. If you're saying there's a definite shape, you're sort of implying there's a contrast between the shape and its surroundings. May
Well,
not be a
boundary-
color contrast, but it's some type of dualistic, non.
Well, can you
non-dualism.
perceive if everything was the same color?
Well, let's not go down that road.
I mean, you need contrast to perceive a boundary.
Yeah, that's what we're on to now.
If you were
Is
in
a
a room and
boundary a
everything
contrast?
was the exact same color green, I mean, even the perception of maybe shadows or something, or reflection of light, but if there was no shadow, no reflection of light, you may not be able to perceive anything if everything was the same color, even though they were different objects at different distances.
If you went down to the very most basic entity you could perceive, you wouldn't have colors anymore. I think it's a circle.
Well, I mean, there's different methods of perception. So, I mean, our eye is purely based on light perception, and
Well, there's
some
at
of
least two axes of light perception in there, which is the color contrast and the light and dark contrast.
well, it's
There's
only
quite a bit of information there.
some of the perception is color, and the other is depth.
Depth is something that is simulated through the, I want to say binaural, but it's the ocular equivalent of binaural. Binocular effect.
Yeah, I mean, some perception
It's
is
the fact
actually
that the eyes are not looking in the exact same direction that you're able to simulate a hologram in 3D for perception. That's why if you close one eye, they say, technically it's flat. Worse perception and balance and such. I think the reason that it seems lighter is that what is being observed is a relative contrast, not an absolute contrast. So I'd have to actually go through and measure these, because it is a bit misleading. Like, is the complement of A the same as the complement of B? Are they the same color? Because this is very hard to tell. And that shadow sort of falls apart towards the end there. It's a very, what I'll say is it's a very well constructed optical illusion. So it's very, I haven't really looked into it, but I am interested. I was just slightly disheveled about being unable to get the idea.
Well, I mean, this is, you have rods and cones.
It doesn't have any, I just don't understand. Why are you so stuck on rods and cones? But it
because
doesn't
you
mean
have
anything.
actually the mechanism of perception. So you're saying
The
that
mechanism of perception has really no bearing on what is it, what is it supposed to establish exactly?
well, because only one of those perceives color. One perceives photons, and just the presence of light without color, and one perceives color. So yeah, I mean, in terms of contrast, that something darker emits less photons. So you perceive contrast in terms of something that's brighter emits more photons and will appear to have higher contrast. So if you're looking at A versus B, if A is in a lighter region, you're getting more receptors of that area. But it's in just the physical phenomenon of how perception occurs, you have two separate elements of reception. One